That night a question was asked in the television studio. Kanté stayed silent for 7 seconds. And then the single sentence he spoke shocked millions. The cameras were live. RMC Sports Studio, Paris. March 2024. Post-match analysis following France's friendly against Germany. The kind of routine interview that happens 1,000 times a season. Bright lights. Comfortable chairs. Experienced journalists asking predictable questions to tired footballers who give predictable answers. N'Golo Kanté sat in the guest chair wearing his France training jacket, that familiar warm smile on his face. He'd played the full 90 minutes. Covered more ground than any other player on the pitch. Made 7 tackles. Won possession 12 times. The kind of performance that had become so routine for Kanté that nobody even remarked on it anymore. The interview had been going smoothly. Standard questions. Standard answers. Kanté was humble as always, deflecting praise to his teammates, talking about the collective effort, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to represent his country. And then journalist Laurent Moreau asked the question. N'Golo, you've achieved everything in football. World Cup. Premier League titles. You've been named the best midfielder in the world. But there's one thing people always notice, you never argue with referees. You never complain. Even when decisions go against you. Even when you're clearly fouled. Why is that? Don't you think sometimes you need to stand up for yourself? The studio expected the usual Kanté response. Something humble. Something about respecting the referee's job. Something polite and diplomatic that would make everyone smile and move on to the next question. But something happened. Kanté's smile faded. Not dramatically. Not with anger. It just disappeared. His expression became completely neutral. His eyes, usually so warm, became focused and distant at the same time, like he was looking at Laurent Moreau but seeing something else entirely. The silence stretched. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Laurent shifted in his seat, suddenly uncertain. The studio producer touched his earpiece, wondering if there was a technical problem. 4 seconds. 5. 6. Everyone in that studio felt it, the temperature dropping, the air becoming heavy. This wasn't Kanté being polite and thinking about his answer. This was something else. 7 seconds. Then Kanté spoke. My father taught me something when I was 8 years old, he said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. And I think maybe it's time I tell that story. Kanté didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1997. N'Golo Kanté wasn't always N'Golo Kanté, world champion and beloved midfielder. He was once just Golo, a small 8-year-old boy living in a cramped apartment in rural Malmaison, a suburb west of Paris. His parents had emigrated from Mali years earlier. His father worked as a sanitation worker, early morning shifts, physically demanding, the kind of job that wore a man down over decades. Money was always tight. The apartment was small. N'Golo shared a room with his brothers. But his father, despite the exhaustion, despite the financial pressure, always found time on Sunday afternoons to take N'Golo to the local park to kick a ball around. One Sunday in October 1997, they were walking to the park. N'Golo was dribbling a worn football along the sidewalk, lost in his own world of imaginary matches and commentary. His father walked beside him, quiet as always, hands in his work jacket pockets. They passed a small cafe where a group of men were watching football on television through the window. PSG was playing. The volume was loud enough to hear from the street. Someone scored. The men inside erupted in celebration, shouting, banging tables, arms raised. One man came bursting out of the cafe, so excited he nearly knocked into N'Golo's father. The collision was slight, barely a brush, but it was enough to make the man spill some of his beer. The man turned, saw N'Golo's father, and his celebration turned to anger instantly. Watch where you're going. The man spat, his words slurred with alcohol and aggression. N'Golo's father had done nothing wrong. He'd been walking normally on the sidewalk. The drunk man had burst out without looking. It was completely, obviously not his fault. But N'Golo's father didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point out the injustice. He simply stepped aside and said, "Pardon, monsieur." The drunk man laughed, a cruel, mocking laugh, and went back into the cafe, still muttering about immigrants who don't watch where they're going. N'Golo was furious. Even at 8 years old, he understood the unfairness. His father had done nothing wrong. The man had been rude, drunk, and racist. His small hands clenched into fists. "Papa, why didn't you say something? He was wrong." "You didn't do anything." His father kept walking. For a long moment he didn't respond. Then he stopped, crouched down to N'Golo's eye level right there on the sidewalk, and spoke words that would shape the rest of N'Golo's life. "N'Golo, listen to me. That man in there, he thinks he won something. He thinks because he made me apologize he has power. But do you know what real power is?" N'Golo shook his head. "Real power is not needing to prove you're right. Real power is knowing who you are and not letting anyone else's anger change that. That man will go home tonight and forget this happened. But I will go home to my family. I will sleep well. And tomorrow I will wake up and continue being who I am. He cannot take that from me with his words. Do you understand?" "But it's not fair," N'Golo protested. "No," his father agreed. "It's not fair. But N'Golo, the world will be unfair to you many times. Many, many times. And every time you will have a choice. You can waste your energy fighting to prove the world wrong, or you can use that energy to become so good at what you do that the unfairness becomes irrelevant. Which do you think is stronger?" Young N'Golo thought about it. "Becoming so good they can't ignore you." His father smiled. "Exactly. Never let anyone make you small by making you angry. Your work will speak louder than any argument ever could." They continued to the park. His father never mentioned the incident again. But N'Golo never forgot it. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. In the RMC Sports studio, the cameras stayed locked on Kanté. Laurent Moreau sat motionless. The other analysts in the studio had gone completely silent. Nobody interrupted. Nobody even breathed loudly. "My father died when I was 11. Kanté continued, his voice still quiet, still controlled, but carrying something deeper now. "And after he died, I had to make a choice. I could become angry at how unfair life had been to him, how hard he worked, how little he had, how people treated him. Or I could honor what he taught me." He paused, looking directly at Laurent. "You ask why I don't argue with referees? Why I don't complain? You ask if I need to stand up for myself?" The faintest hint of something, not quite a smile, but not quite sadness either, crossed his face. "I stand up for myself every single day. Every time I step on that pitch. Every time I win the ball. Every time I make a tackle. Every time I run 1 more kilometer than the player I'm marking. That is how I stand up for myself." The silence in the studio was absolute. "The referee makes a bad call?" Kanté continued. "What do I gain by shouting? Does it change the decision? No. Does it make me play better? No. Does it help my team? No. But it does one thing very well, it makes me lose focus. It makes me waste energy on anger instead of using that energy to win the next ball." He leaned forward slightly. "My father taught me that real strength is not in proving you're right. It's in being so consistent, so reliable, so undeniable that your work proves it for you. You want to know why I don't argue with referees? Because I learned a long time ago that the most powerful response to injustice is not anger. It's excellence." Laurent Moreau looked like he'd forgotten he was a journalist. He just nodded slowly, unable to find words. Away from the cameras, Kanté made a choice no one expected. What happened next wasn't broadcast. The cameras had cut to commercial. but everyone in that studio witnessed it. Kanté stood up, walked over to Laurent Moreau, and extended his hand. Not for a handshake. In his palm was a small, worn photograph, creased at the edges, colors faded with age. The photograph showed a man in work clothes standing in a park, his hand on the shoulder of a small boy holding a football. The man was smiling, tired but genuine. The boy was looking up at his father with absolute adoration. "This is the only picture I have of my father and me together," Kanté said quietly, so only Laurent and a few nearby crew members could hear. "I keep it in my wallet. I look at it before every match. And I ask myself, am I honoring what he taught me? Am I using my energy wisely? Am I being the man he wanted me to become?" Laurent's eyes filled with tears. "You asked if I need to stand up for myself," Kanté continued. "This man, this sanitation worker who the world saw as small, he taught me that standing up for yourself doesn't mean making noise. It means being unbreakable in who you are. The referee can make a bad call. The opponent can foul me. The crowd can boo. None of it changes who I am or what I do. That's real power." He carefully folded the photograph and put it back in his wallet. "So when people say Kanté never complains, they think it's because I'm too nice. Too soft. But it's not softness. It's strength. The kind of strength my father had when he apologized to a drunk man who wronged him. The strength to know that my dignity doesn't depend on winning every argument. It depends on being excellent at what I do." But what followed would stay with everyone who witnessed it, forever. Laurent Moreau did something he'd never done in 15 years of sports journalism. He took off his press credential, the laminated card that hung around his neck, the symbol of his professional authority, and held it in both hands. "N'Golo," he said, his voice shaking. "I've interviewed hundreds of footballers. Champions. Legends. Icons. But I've never heard anyone speak about their father like that. About strength like that." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I asked you that question because I thought I was being a good journalist. Asking the tough question. Challenging the narrative. But the truth is, I asked it because I don't have that kind of strength. When a referee makes a bad call against my team, I scream at the television. When someone cuts me off in traffic, I honk and curse. When I feel disrespected, I argue. And I've always told myself that's normal. That's standing up for myself." His hands tightened on his press credential. "But you just showed me that what I call standing up for myself is actually weakness. It's me needing external validation. Needing to win the argument to feel strong. And what you do, that silence, that focus, that refusal to waste energy, that's actual strength. The kind I've never had." Kanté simply nodded, that warm smile returning to his face. "We all learn at different times," he said gently. "The important thing is that we learn." When the cameras came back from commercial, Laurent Moreau couldn't continue the interview. The producers had to bring in another journalist. Laurent sat in the green room, staring at his press credential, thinking about a drunk man in a cafe in 1997 and a sanitation worker who taught his son that excellence is the best response to injustice. The clip of Kanté's answer, just the on-camera portion, went viral within hours. 15 million views in 3 days. But what people shared wasn't highlights of his tackles or his runs. It was 7 seconds of silence followed by wisdom about real strength. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. 3 months later, Laurent Moreau published an article titled, "The Day N'Golo Kanté Taught Me What Strength Actually Means." It became one of the most read pieces in French sports journalism history. In it he wrote, "I've covered World Cups and Champions League finals. I've interviewed Messi and Ronaldo and Mbappé. But the most important moment of my career happened in a television studio when a quiet midfielder from Mali showed me that my father, who I'd always seen as weak because he never fought back when his boss disrespected him, was actually the strongest man I'd ever known. Just like Kanté's father. Just like Kanté himself." The photograph of Kanté's father, the one he keeps in his wallet, has never been published. Kanté has never spoken about him publicly again. He doesn't need to. Because every time a referee makes a bad call and Kanté simply turns away and focuses on the next play, he's honoring that lesson from a park in rural Malmaison. Every time an opponent fouls him, and he gets up without complaint, he's proving that real power doesn't need to announce itself. Every time he covers more ground than anyone else on the pitch, making tackles in the 93rd minute with the same intensity as the first, he's showing the world what his father meant. Excellence makes unfairness irrelevant. And somewhere, in a quiet moment before big matches, N'Golo Kanté takes out that worn photograph, looks at his father's face, and asks, "Did I honor you today, Papa?" The answer is always yes.